Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said on Wednesday that she and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had agreed to strengthen trade collaboration, particularly in light of the tariffs from U.S. President Donald Trump.
We have breaking news to lead off this hour. Prime Minister Mark Carney is taking fresh steps to reposition Canada's trade relationships. He's in Germany this morning. On the same day, his U.S. trade minister is restarting talks with Washington.
In 2025, Trump's tariffs backfired in the most shocking way. Steel and aluminum faced up to 50% duties, but instead of saving American factories, the move triggered chaos. Auto plants slowed, prices shot up, and 7 nations turned their backs on Washington, signing billion-dollar lifelines with Canada instead. The U.S. wanted control, but it ended up isolated. This is the trade war America never expected to lose. In March 2025, Trump's tariffs hit Brazil with a brutal 25% duty on beef, soy, and ethanol, shaking the country's $12.8 billion agricultural exports. American markets turned hostile overnight, leaving Brazilian ranchers and farmers facing disaster. But Brazil refused to bow down to Washington's pressure. Instead, it turned north, striking a $2.1 billion lifeline deal with Canada within weeks. Alberta and Manitoba quickly became the new home for Brazilian beef. Winnipeg and Saskatoon opened their doors for soy. Quebec took in ethanol shipments that once fueled American industries. The shift saved 5,000 jobs in Brazil's ranching sector and added 400 new jobs in Canadian meat processing plants. Another 250 roles appeared in grain cooperatives across Canada's prairies. Beyond that, Brazil boosted its ethanol byproduct exports to China, proving it could diversify even further. Analysts said this was a clear message. Brazil no longer depends on the United States. Meanwhile, American consumers felt the sting. Supermarket prices for beef and soy surged by 10.3%, sparking anger at home. Washington's attempt to tighten control only weakened its influence. Brazil's pivot showed how quickly nations can escape U.S. dominance when punished. And for Canada, this was just the beginning of its rise as a reliable new partner. When Trump raised tariffs by 25% on Mexican auto parts in early 2025, the blow landed hardest in Mexico's automotive heartlands of Ciudad Juarez and Monterrey. Thousands of suppliers who had relied on U.S. factories suddenly faced canceled orders and empty warehouses. Instead of waiting for Washington to change, Mexico acted fast. Within weeks, it signed the North Corridor Alliance, an $8.5 billion trade pact with Canada. This deal rerouted suspension systems, engines, and electronics away from Detroit and straight into Ontario. Canadian auto plants in Windsor and Brampton quickly felt the boost, reporting a 22% rise in assembly activity by spring. For Mexico, the deal protected its vital industry, preserving tens of thousands of jobs that were on the line. For Canada, the flood of new supply created fresh opportunities for logistics firms and auto hubs. Yet the U.S. was left scrambling. Detroit's plants struggled with shortages, forcing costly production slowdowns. Union leaders warned that Trump's tariffs were pushing American auto workers into unemployment. Even Canadian officials voiced concern that Chinese components might slip through Mexico's exports, sparking new debates over USMCA's future. But the bigger story was clear. Mexico had turned away from its old dependency on Detroit, and Canada was ready to take the wheel. America's attempt to dominate backfired, leaving its once mighty auto industry weakened while its neighbors grew stronger. When Trump placed a 30% tariff on Australian iron ore and lithium in early 2025, the impact was immediate. Mining towns from Pilbara to Queensland faced cancelled U.S. contracts and shrinking revenues. Australia's backbone industry was in danger, threatening thousands of workers. But instead of surrendering, Canberra pivoted quickly. In April, it announced the Northern Stars Initiative, a $3.6 billion trade pact with Canada. Under this deal, Australian iron ore shipments were rerouted to ports like Vancouver and Thunder Bay, feeding Ontario's steel mills. By mid-May, Canadian output was already up 18%, giving local industries a powerful boost. At the same time, Australian lithium miners secured deals with a Canadian electric bus manufacturer, moving battery-grade lithium carbonate to Welland, Ontario. This agreement saved 2,100 mining jobs in Australia and created 1,000 new opportunities in Canada's green industries. Analysts called it a bold rescue, showing how Australia could shield itself from U.S. hostility by diversifying. For Canada, the move strengthened its role in the EV revolution, ensuring a steady supply of critical minerals. Meanwhile, U.S. manufacturers were left struggling to source raw materials at higher prices, slowing their own transition to clean energy. Trump's tariffs, meant to hurt rivals, instead pushed Australia and Canada closer together. The result was another major victory for Ottawa and another painful setback for Washington. When Trump added a 30% tariff on French hydrogen electrolyzers in 2025, the effect was devastating. Production lines in Lyon and Marseille slowed, and orders from U.S. buyers were canceled overnight. France's clean energy dream was in danger, but instead of giving in, Paris acted quickly. In April, France and Canada signed a $1.3 billion hydrogen pact to keep projects alive. This deal included shipping French-made electrolyzers to Canadian provinces like Quebec and Ontario, where new hydrogen plants were already planned. This partnership protected 1,000 jobs in France's hydrogen sector and created another 900 new positions in Canada. It also gave Canada access to advanced French technology, boosting its role in the green energy race. For France, the agreement kept its national hydrogen plan on track, aiming for 4.5 gigawatts of capacity by 2030, backed by billions in public support. European analysts praised the move as a smart escape from U.S. pressure. Canada celebrated too, training a new workforce to operate the imported systems and expanding its renewable energy supply. Meanwhile, America's clean energy rollout stalled as the tariff cut it off from advanced European technology. Trump's trade war was supposed to make the U.S. stronger, but instead it drove France and Canada closer together. The result was a strong alliance for clean energy and another step away from Washington's influence. Trump's decision to impose a 20% tariff on South Korea's lithium-ion battery modules in 2025 hit Seoul like a shockwave. Korean battery giants LG Chem and Samsung SDI suddenly faced blocked exports to one of their biggest markets in the United States. America's tariff volatility even raised costs. Samsung SDI said higher U.S. tariffs would increase EV battery costs by burdening imported components. California's EV projects stalled overnight as orders were canceled, putting thousands of Korean jobs at risk. But South Korea refused to be cornered. Within weeks, it struck a $1.8 billion agreement with Northvolt Canada to reroute shipments. 500,000 battery modules were redirected to Canadian hubs in Windsor, London, and Hamilton, where EV assembly lines were waiting for supply. This move saved more than 3,000 jobs in South Korea's battery sector, while fueling Canada's clean energy expansion. By May, 2 Canadian facilities had already trained hundreds of new technicians to handle Korean battery technology. LG Energy Solution also signaled caution. They expected a drop in Q2 revenue and reduced investment plans because of tariff uncertainty. For South Korea, the pivot proved its resilience in the face of U.S. hostility. For Canada, it meant a sudden rise as an EV supply chain leader. Meanwhile, America's EV transition slowed, leaving Washington watching from the sidelines. Trump's tariff was meant to weaken rivals, but instead it supercharged the partnership between Seoul and Ottawa, showing once again how the world can move forward without the United States. Trump's tariffs, raised to 50% on steel and aluminum and extended to wind turbine components, sent shockwaves through Denmark's clean energy industry, including Ørsted's U.S. projects, which the CEO warns will face meaningful impact due to rising costs. Factories in Aarhus and Esbjerg suddenly faced canceled U.S. contracts and halted shipments, once critical for American wind farms. For Denmark, a world leader in renewable energy, this was a serious setback. But Copenhagen pivoted swiftly. By April, Denmark and Canada began building a green trade corridor spanning offshore wind, hydrogen, and low-carbon aluminum. This move protected Denmark's renewable ambitions and helped Canada ramp up its clean energy capacity with advanced Danish components. Meanwhile, U.S. wind projects slowed. Vestas warned that tariff-related cost increases would ultimately raise electricity prices for American consumers. Trump's tariffs were supposed to strengthen America, but instead they pushed Danish innovation toward Canada and left Washington trailing in the global green energy race. Trump's 25% tariff on German cars and auto parts in 2025 slammed Europe's biggest industry, with exports to the U.S. plunging 25% in May and 13% in April. Factories in Munich and Stuttgart faced canceled orders, risking thousands of jobs. But Germany moved fast. Berlin struck a $10 billion quota deal with Canada, redirecting vehicles and components north instead of to the U.S. German brands like BMW and Volkswagen kept supply chains alive, while Canadian auto hubs gained new investment. At the same time, Detroit struggled with shortages, higher costs, and delayed production. Instead of protecting America, Trump's tariffs weakened its auto sector and pushed Germany closer to Canada, delivering a $10 billion blow to Washington's influence. America's tariffs were meant to protect, but instead they drove allies away and handed Canada the driver's seat in global trade. Subscribe now for more sharp breakdowns of how U.S. mistakes are reshaping the world economy.